In this video, we're going to talk about psychological stressors. And there's going to be 4 main types we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about pressure, uncontrollability, frustration, and conflicts. And there's going to be subtypes for frustrations and conflicts. So we'll start with pressure. First of all, if you have a psychological stressor of pressure, this means that there is stress, psychological stress, because of demands or expectations for your behavior that come from an outside source. An example of this would be like time. So when you're under a time crunch, when you have a deadline looming, that is going to be pressure. Uncontrollability is the degree of control you have over a certain event. And so the way this works is that the more control is less stress. So conversely, the less control you have, the more stress you're going to experience. So this makes it a negative correlation. So if you have a lot of uncontrollability, you're going to also have a lot of stress. The more that you get to determine what happens, the less stressful that's going to be. This also helps explain the connection between unpredictability and stress. The more unpredictable something is, the more stress you're going to have, because if it's unpredictable, you can't control it. Now again, for frustration, there's a couple of different types here. Overall, frustration is that experience produced from blocking of a desired goal or fulfillment of a need. So when something blocks you, there's 2 types that you can have here. One type is if it's an external frustration. So something external to you blocks what's happening, like getting stuck in traffic. You want to get somewhere on time and you can't because of these people around you. That's something external to you. It's going to frustrate you. The other version is going to be internal. If it's an internal frustration, it's a personal frustration, which means that it's something like a characteristic about you that is going to prevent you from doing it. So say, for example, you want to be a professional basketball player, but you're 5 feet tall. There is something inherent about you that is going to make it more difficult. Or you want to be a pilot, but you have really bad eyesight. You're not going to be allowed to fly like in the Air Force because of your eyesight. It's something internal to you that you can't change. So those are the 2 types of frustrations, both falling into that psychological stressor category. The other thing to know about frustrations is that there's 3 responses you can have to them. So these 3 responses fall into the categories of persistence. You can also have aggression, and finally you can have escape or withdrawal. So starting with persistence, what persistence is going to be is when you continue efforts to get around what is causing the frustration. So for example, if your frustration is internal and say you have difficulty in English because you have dyslexia. And so persistence would be continuing to practice, continuing to study to try to work on that internal frustration that is causing you problems. Aggression is going to be exactly what aggression is, which is actions meant to harm or destroy. So this would be road rage, when there's a car that won't let you buy. This is when you, not a good form of aggression. Aggression actually is never good. But if you kick your dog because your dog keeps getting underfoot, that would be external frustrations. This would be potentially self-harm if you are mad at yourself, or if you're trying to lose weight and you do it in a dangerous way. So you have this internal frustration and you are basically trying to hurt yourself. So aggression, never going to be a good response. And then finally, escape or withdrawal. This is going to be when you leave the presence of the stressor. So this can be literal, or it can be psychological. So you are mad at your wife and so you leave the house. That's going to be literally escaping the situation. If it could be psychological, that would be things like when you go to your happy place when you're stuck in traffic. You can't actually leave the traffic, you're stuck, so you psychologically leave. Or if you escape with drugs or alcohol. People drinking away their problems are using escape and withdrawal. So those are the three ways that you can escape or respond to frustrations. So the final type of psychological stressor is conflicts. And what a conflict is basically when you have to choose between two different things. And there are 5 types of conflict. They are approach. These are going to start to look somewhat similar. Avoidance. The third type is approach avoidance. The fourth type is double approach avoidance. And the final type is multiple approach avoidance. So we'll start with the top. Approach. In this one, you have to choose between 2 good things. Like you're going to order dessert in a restaurant and you can't choose between the chocolate cake or the blueberry pie. You know what? Both are going to be good, but you're like, oh no, I don't know which one to choose. That's going to be an approach. 2 good things, but you can only have one. Another way to put this would be like a win-win situation. Avoidance is the exact opposite. You have to choose between 2 bad things. Might help if between is spelled correctly. So this would be, for example, the phrase between a rock and a hard place. That's going to be avoidance. If your mom says, okay, you're getting in trouble, would you rather be grounded for a week or be spanked? You know what? No kid's going to be happy with either of those, but you got to choose one. So avoidance, 2 bad things. Approach avoidance is when you have to choose or not choose one thing that's both good and bad. So there's good and bad elements to this one thing that you have to choose between. So for example, if you are deciding whether or not to accept a job offer, you have to look at the good and the bad parts of that. Okay, so here's the money, but here's the hours and here's the location. There's good and bad parts. One thing, you either take it or leave it. Double approach avoidance is similar to approach avoidance in that there's good and bad elements, but it's double, so you're choosing between 2 goals that both have good and bad parts. So for example, if you are deciding between being a psychology major or a sociology major, those would be 2 goals you have to choose between, and there's going to be good and bad parts of either of those. What jobs could you get? How much fun are the classes going to be? Can you do it here at Coastal? Would you have to transfer? You have to look at the good and bad parts between these 2 choices you can make. And multiple approach avoidance is when there's more than 2 goals that all have good and bad parts. So if you, for example, in the Coast Guard, my spouse and I get a list of possible places we can move every few years, and we have to create a wish list of order of where we want to move. So when we are looking at this big list to put in order, we are thinking about the good and bad parts of moving to each of these locations. So there's multiple choices. Our list is usually over 30 places long, and you have to look at the good and bad parts of every single one of these. So approach, two good things. Avoidance, two bad things. Approach avoidance, one thing that's both good and bad. Double approach avoidance, two things that are both good and bad. And multiple approach avoidance, more than two things that are all good and bad. So those are psychological stressors.